being someone who is willing to kind of step outside the system to look at it, I did. And I put myself into therapy, and I hated it so much.
Why?
Because it was so exposing to what I kind of subconsciously knew was true about me.
Okay.
It started speaking to the dark side of my gifts, and church does a really good job of highlighting the bright side of your gifts.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, hey, welcome to the Upper Left Show. I'm here with my friend Danny Clinton from Vancouver, Washington. My name is Gabe Kolstad, and super glad to be here with you, Danny. How's it going?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Good. Thanks for driving down to Aloha, Oregon from Vancouver, Washington.
Yeah.
How long did that take you today?
48 minutes.
Okay. That's not so bad.
Yeah. No,
middle of the day, a little bit better than morning or evening would have been horrible, right?
Yes. We picked a good time.
That darn bridge.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. In fact, it's really fun because, we've talked before a lot around the city about how sometimes the Columbia River, which separates Oregon and Washington, also can act as a separator to the body of Christ. But we're trying to bridge that gap, and I'm really, really pumped to have you in investing some time here.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your church. We'd love to know more.
Yeah, I'm pastoring a church right now that I helped plant. It's just 14 years old, just last month.
Okay.
I've been in full-time vocational ministry for 24 years. I've been married for 25, 3 kids.
Okay.
I've really only, I grew up in church. I'm one of those people who were like born on a pew, if you will.
Yeah.
But I've worked at 3 churches. I worked at a church that I helped plant that grew into a very, very large church. The growth was beautiful, but we eventually ended up having a lot of campuses. We had campuses internationally, and it just took a huge toll on my family. And so at the time, I thought if I changed environments, I would change the product of the ministry that I was experiencing and how much it was affecting our family. So I moved overseas. I worked at a church for a year in New Zealand, which was really beautiful.
Wow. Okay.
But I brought all my problems with me. Nothing really changed about stuff in my marriage or in my story. It all just went with me. And so after a year of that, which was beautiful, I came back and we started Kessid, hoping we could create something different.
Yeah.
And I think we have for us our story and all that. But it's been a beautiful thing. It's been really hard. Church planting's tough, as anyone who's done.
Not for the faint of heart.
No, very bruisey. But I love it. I mean, I think it's who God has called me to be. And yet at the same time, especially in this next season, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, it seems like the more and more I let go of my idea of what it's supposed to look like, the more it has become something just far beyond my expectations and is now actually blessing my family instead of taking from my family.
Oh, that's something.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I mean, if you're, listening, watching, and you're in a situation where the opposite is happening, you're probably like, tell me more about that. How does that happen where your ministry doesn't suck the life out of you? Yeah.
Well, I think we had to decide that, we were not going to, control every step of our church is called Kessid. And Kessid is it's that word in Hebrew, that means steadfast love or merciful love. David uses it a lot to describe God's love.
Yeah.
And, the picture for me is, it's like that picture of a mother standing outside a prison, outside the chain link, waiting for a son or daughter to get out, and everybody else has abandoned them. But there she is, ready to take you to Wendy's, right? It's this merciful, can't get rid of it, can't get it off you love. And when we really bought into that, instead of a specific structure or a specific paradigm, we were able to filter, how does that affect our families? How does that affect the people who work with us and at the church? How does that affect ministry leaders? And it just changed the tempo completely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. I can't wait to dig into that just a little bit more, in a bit, cause I think one of the things that I think is so difficult to do is to create a culture. especially to create one intentionally. It's easy. Everybody creates a culture, but most of it is accidental if we're not paying attention. And so it would be fascinating to hear more about how you've created what I think is a healthy culture at your church.
Yeah, we're trying.
You're trying. Yeah. I know. You're doing a great job. Okay. I want to know, because your church is not just one location. So you're in Vancouver, Washington, absolutely part of the Portland metro area, carries many of the same cultural undertones, likes, dislikes, etc. But what is it like pastoring a multi-site church in Vancouver? Like, what are some of the pluses? What are some of the challenges?
Yeah, I had experience with multi-site because of the other church. I think we were up to 7 campuses, and I think 5 of them were video and the others were live.
Okay.
So this particular one came about. We have a kind of what we would call, I guess, I don't like the word main campus, but we have the campus that the office is at and that everybody functions out of. And then we have another campus that actually is a whole bunch of land, but a very small building and an older congregation.
Okay.
And so the thing that we did is we stopped, based on the other experience, we stopped trying to pour the same DNA throughout the whole thing. Okay. As if we were reaching the same people, which I don't know is a typical multi-site campus strategy. So we really run that campus. They have their own pastor. They have their own creative team. As I said, they're much older, and so we've just really allowed them to kind of sit inside their context, and so therefore receive what they need based on what we're experiencing. And it can sometimes feel like having 2 different churches. We still teach the same series.
Okay.
We teach 50% of the same message. The pastor that leads that one adjusts it for him and for them. They do a lot of their own events. They do a lot of potlucks. They do a bunch of stuff we don't do that we couldn't do with our size. Yeah. But we include them in everything that they might want to be a part of. And it's just worked beautiful. They've nearly doubled in size, since they became part, which is really special for them because, that's what they wanted. They wanted to grow. They wanted children. They wanted younger families. Yeah. And then that's all happening. And so, I don't know that it's as much part of my strategy, as much as it seems like God just handed this beautiful family to us. And now, we just operate, with their health and our health in mind.
Okay. Yeah. That's killer. Was it always like that? I mean, did it have any adjustments along the way, or when you first said, okay, let's enter into this partnership, is it still rolling out kind of like you set it up?
No, when we first started it, we weren't, everybody kind of wanted this rotating speaking platform where I would go there and we'd zipper back and forth.
Right.
And it just didn't work. It didn't work with kind of the existing structure. And we maintained the elders of that church, as kind of an advisory board. And so they were very helpful in like, hey, this is working, this isn't working. Right. Until eventually it just became clear that, some changes needed to be made to meet the needs they asked for. And once we met those needs, it's been pretty much all good since.
Okay. Yeah. That's neat. I mean, one of the things that I think we're learning as a group of leaders around the Portland metro area is just how important local is. Just how important the local context and how small that context usually is. Maybe unique to Portland in some ways that it's a very much neighborhood centric metro area. So you do have a totally different vibe in one place than you do in another. And And we just leaned into that. Yeah. We haven't fought that and been like, well, that's not our DNA. That's not our, like they do communion weekly. It's part of their story. Yeah. And we do communion monthly. And at first it was like, well, that's not what we do. And they're like, but it's what we do. And so we just sat down and we're like, hey, let's learn from each other. We should maybe do it, maybe we add it more. And they maintain that still to this day because it's such a value there in that system. Okay. So yeah. And so your focus then, I mean, it sounds like even as you were describing like how the church started and what the driving principle seems to be Kessid rather than an operating system or something like that. So it seems like you're just leaning in constantly to that as the unifying factor rather than the way we do things.
Yeah, there is not really a way we do things. There is, this is going to sound, but there is a way that I see that God wants us to do things for the season that we're doing them until he changes it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times he changes it by bringing new insight, new talent, new anointings, new gifts, and we have just flowed with that, almost the whole time. And I think it's a really important part of actually planting in the Northwest, is not coming with this paradigm that says, well, here's the process I'm going to shove people through.
Yeah.
I have not seen it work here. Really ever. The Northwest is really unique in that we want real, we want raw, we want you to see me.
Yeah.
I know of a couple churches around that do video venue, but for the most part, that's not the strongest probably leg to stand on if you're going to plant here.
Right. No, and we tried. I mean, that was part of our multi-site strategy at Westside when we were doing multi-site. Before we launched our campuses as churches. And, there were pros and cons. But what we came to realize was there were more cons than pros for us. And I think the reason was because it was that feeling that this wasn't unique to a situation, and a time, for sure. So that's wise what you're saying.
No, I don't know. Thank you. It's just, we've had to go where he asked us to go.
Yeah.
So it's like he's asked us to climb this hill and there was just too much weight. He didn't ask us to drop the burdens, but there was no way to get up the hill. So we were like, I guess we don't need that. I guess we don't need that. And now we're pretty streamlined and the weather is good. And so we're like, okay, we understand now why we didn't need all that stuff.
Yeah.
But we didn't at the time.
What are, besides, let's say, a multi-site model that was tighter, what are some other things you've needed to let go of to climb that hill?
I would say the biggest thing we needed to let go was what you just highlighted, was focusing on the paradigm instead of the people. And people, no, I don't just mean congregation. Actually, it's also staff and it's also the families of pastors themselves. Like, we really asked questions around what would happen if we just focused on health, and what would happen if we set down metrics that we consider, church growth, usuals. And instead we picked up things like, for instance, we started a Thursday weekend service. So our structure right now is we have a Thursday service that's not streamed. It's super organic.
Okay.
Everybody knows that it's raw. I say it from stage.
Okay.
It's not streamed. We throw everything at them. And we actually even a few times have voted like, hey, do you think the Sunday crowd can handle that? And it's a really fun service.
Oh, yeah.
It's not online. But we started that not because we wanted more growth or we wanted more attendance. We started it for the staff because we wanted 2 days off in a row.
Yeah.
And once you do a Thursday weekend, Friday and Saturday are like so relaxing because you've already done your weekend. We have an after service meeting to make tweaks. So our week starts on Sunday. We didn't do that because we, again, wanted more attendance. It was just that we were like, our families are burning out. Our volunteers are getting tired. We're tired. I'm tired. My wife's really tired of this. And I mean, I've had Saturday, Mondays off for 20 years.
Yeah.
We only started the Thursday service, I think, 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
And it's transformed just the whole culture of why we do what we do, and that it's not just for more bodies in the pews. And it's probably our fastest growing service.
Interesting.
Super. Yeah. Like, it didn't fit. It just fit. It didn't fit inside we should have started the Sunday night if we wanted to be, best fruit, lowest fruit.
Yeah.
But it didn't, it just gave more work and the break was still short. So we decided to do something that instead leveraged health as its primary goal. And it just resulted in better volunteer retention. Our families, are happier. Whenever somebody doesn't speak, like if I'm not speaking on a weekend, I have Thursday through Sunday off, and so it's just been a beautiful thing to kind of change the metric and trust that the fruit that comes is the fruit he has for us. It may be different than others, but it feeds us really well.
Yeah. I would imagine your team is very thankful for that whole mentality. Yeah. Just watching their back. Yeah. So just pragmatically, what is the Thursday team versus the Sunday team? Same team. Same
sermons, same team, same worship.
Kids ministry, same team.
Everybody's on the same rhythm. So the whole team has Friday, Saturday off. Okay. And they're pretty sacred.
What about volunteers?
Different volunteer teams.
Okay.
Yeah. But those are different per service. We have the we have Kessid Uptown. That's where we are. And then we have Kessid Columbia.
Yeah.
Columbia is the smaller church.
Right.
They have their own children's director. They have their own children's team. Then I have, a children's pastor for Kessid Uptown, and he has a different volunteer team and volunteer leads for Thursday, and then separate for Sunday at 9, and then separate for Sunday at 11. So,
so do both of your campuses have the same service schedule?
We have 6:30 Thursday. We have 9 and 11 Sunday, and the other campus has an 11 o'clock. They had a 10 o'clock actually.
Okay,
they have single service, but we slowly moved them to an 11 o'clock because eventually they've grown. We're going to end up adding 9.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Okay. Question about Thursday, 6:30. How do you handle food?
We haven't had to. We do snacks, and we do it just late enough that it seems like people are able to get dinner.
Yeah.
It's not our most child heavy service because it's a school night.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just people that can make that work in their structure, and a lot of church cheaters that come from other churches that just want a service they don't have to serve at or volunteer at, and we call them out and they laugh. And I do the same. Yeah. Like, if I can find a Sunday night service in my area, I'm there.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, I don't have to, I don't have to carry anything. I don't have to serve. So we have quite a few volunteers from other churches that are coming just to go to church.
Yeah.
Which I think part of that is back to that system that we've built where sometimes your only church is serving.
Yeah.
And then you don't go to church because they need you.
Burnout City, right?
Quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really fun crowd. Actually, they identify themselves now. So.
That's cool. Well, I mean, thank you for letting me push you on these details because I'm just fascinated with that stuff. But what we really want to talk about, I think more than anything, is the idea of mental health and ministry, particularly in the Northwest and probably particularly right now.
Yeah.
I know you're concerned about it. I know you're devoted to making a difference in that area. I mean, talk to us about your journey with that.
Yeah, that earlier crisis I mentioned of transitioning from a very large church to a church plant from scratch, that didn't happen by accident. That happened because I had allowed in my marriage just a lot of misfire, a lot of just kind of misfocus. I was coming out of that season. I think I was there for 10 years before we started Kessid. Yeah. I just really began to look at my story and what I was listening to. And I became concerned, and my wife actually started a therapy journey that I didn't understand at the time because I was still of the mindset you could just pray everything away.
Wow.
And she got 4 or 5 years in and she started transforming. Stuff she carried her whole life suddenly was placed instead of just kind of tearing out of her, spirit. She suddenly had new context and new patience and new understanding. And it really challenged me to start to ask different questions. And so, being someone who is willing to kind of step outside the system to look at it, I did. And I put myself into therapy, and I hated it so much.
Why?
Because it was so exposing to what I kind of subconsciously knew was true about me.
Okay.
It started speaking to the dark side of my gifts, and church does a really good job of highlighting the bright side of your gifts. And started asking questions about agenda and motive and, who I was and what I was really about. But through that experience, it started realigning, me to be the man I think God actually intended for me to be. That I think I jumped into ministry hoping to be, that ministry started kind of piling expectations and desires. And all of a sudden I was a shape in ministry. I just couldn't get comfortable in. And this started tearing that off. And that's a really uncomfortable process.
Yeah.
To have those things torn away. It was remarkable, but it deepened, my story, my marriage. I believe it deepened Kessid in every way. We at one point had a psychologist on staff. We still have a therapist on staff right now who's also a pastor. We have done a lot of emotional health series, which was complicated because, when I first introduced it, the elders that I had really didn't understand.
Okay.
And they were pretty uncomfortable with me standing on stage and telling people, hey, I'm in therapy and I need help. And I'm not all things to all people that I want to be. And that was a process, to get them into a position to see the value of it. Cause it's just not, it's
not very common.
It's not in our culture. And it's certainly, most of my therapists were older white guys. It's definitely not in their culture. So, it was just this really interesting conversation to kind of begin to unpack. But we did a series called Dragons and Dandelions. It was all about facing the big and small, hard to kill things in your life.
Oh, wow.
And it's
great title.
Yeah. It smashed us. Our church, just in a beautiful way, just kind of fell over. And people were like, I think I might need to be in therapy, but I didn't have access to, I had one therapist. So, the journey then began to find, therapists, to find ways in which you can plug people into therapy. It also totally transformed what it meant to pastor people, because from myself, all the way across the board, our pastors now are really good at saying, hey, I can help here, but I'm not a therapist.
Right.
So this is kind of where
I say that all the time.
Yeah. It's important. And I don't think pastors realize sometimes when they're dealing with stuff that requires, tools and structures that we were never equipped with.
Yeah, not at all.
And then you feel the burden that you don't see them improve or develop, or they fall apart even more. And you're like, what is going on? And this really just brought all kinds of clarity and purpose to it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. That's deep. I mean, I think one of the things that I have a question about is what you did, because you did something very brave. But I mean, it's good for you to hear you say how hard it was. Yeah. But I mean, what advice do you have for spiritual leaders who feel that they are the ones that need some help with mental health, but they don't know where to turn or how to get started?
It's very hard right now. There are a couple therapists that I know of who are sort of therapist of therapists, if we're talking specifically to our area. Yeah. The easiest thing that I have done, because I've onboarded a few church leaders who have kind of quietly in the shadows asked if they could also be a part of the, the club of support.
Secret club. Yeah.
And going to sit with therapists, that know lots about therapy, know lots about ministry, or strong believers, and kind of have them help you kind of vet what it is you're after, and then connect you with different potential therapists has been the easiest way. Because you have to shop therapists. They're not all made the same. They're not all about the same thing. So that has been really the easiest way, has been connecting with pastors who have done the work, who have connected them with therapists who know other therapists who are willing to work specifically with pastors and church leaders.
Yeah. Besides I want to ask two questions here, but one is like the fear of coming forward with imperfection. Yeah. I guess going into ministry, quote unquote, being a leader, especially if you have a title like pastor, or if there's any kind of notoriety to your ministry, it definitely makes it harder to do that, I think. What are ways that you think we can fight that culture?
Well, I think an important thing to realize is that I think if I was to say back to you what I hear when you say that, is that the more power that you end up with as a ministry leader, as a pastor, the more popular you are, the more power you have to protect. And I think that therapy teaches the opposite. I think the gospel teaches the opposite, frankly. That Jesus wasn't about us protecting our power. And so a lot of pastors get on stage and they talk about the stuff they used to wrestle with. Back in college, I really had a problem with this. And the problem is you're sitting in the audience as a 45-year-old guy listening to your 40-something-year-old pastor. And you're like, well, then I must not be, obviously I'm just garbage, or my struggles I must just be weak because I still struggle with that. Yeah. Versus sitting on stage and within context and within reason, being able to tell people, or at the front of a room, hey, here's what I'm currently wrestling with. Here's why I think I'm wrestling with it. Here's the tools that I learned that helped me through it. And I'm still okay. The message being that I can discover things about my story, my spirituality, my emotional well-being that are kind of, unstabling, and still exist in a way that I can be reliable, that I can teach, that I can hold true to the things that the Bible teaches us to hold true to. But I really, really believe that a significant problem right now is that pastors have to have a certain image with a certain amount of power to reach a certain level. And this is back to resetting the context. This is just me. I'm just tired of level chasing, and I'm tired of image chasing. And at the end of the day, somebody's going to manage everything I have. They're going to steward everything I've been given, down to, the spouses that marry my kids are going to be part of their lives. And I'm not going to be around for all of this. Yeah. And I know that because the 2 buildings I have were given to me. So I'm stewarding buildings that other people prayed about, leveraged their mortgages over, like stressed about. And those generations knowingly got to a space where they were like, okay, it's time to give it to the next. They gave away their power. Yeah. And so here I am. And now this is so sad, but our culture then is like, thank you for your power. Thank you for your power. Now I'm going to double down and protect my power instead of being like, oh, I'm just a through lane. Like,
that's so good, man.
It's just a whole different way to hold the space.
Yeah.
And so, it would be really scary if you've built your church on your image, that you're the answer person, that you are a step ahead in spirituality. We should be guides. We should know where we're going, but I don't know that it means we should be farther in every single area of our life. And it's really important. I think we admit that to people, that we're like, oh.
Yeah, but I mean, unfortunately, that's the only playbook many of us were given, depending on what age you are. Because I do think there's some actually really healthy things happening right now in spiritual influence and in just culture in general. I mean, not everything is bad that's happening in culture.
Right.
There's some really great things about vulnerability and about authenticity. But if, like, I'm 50, the only playbook I was given was succeed.
Yeah, and do it through making sure you are buttoned up and watertight. Yeah. Instead of the hard thing about being buttoned up and watertight is that your job is to save drowning people. Like, that's our job. Yeah. So we get good at ropes and, rowing, and we just get really bad at jumping out into the spaces with them and saying, hey, I get this. I've been here. Yeah. This is how you swim. And I think the Northwest actually, we hear the idea that the Northwest is the darkest place in the United States, hardest place to plant a church. And I think there's something really beautiful about that, because people here, for the most part, don't play games about what they are and who they are. Anytime I travel, because I have more tattoos than I should in the position I have, I'm told, especially if I go back east and more Bible Belt area. But man, there's something about coming back to the gate going to Portland where I look around and I'm like, these, like, everybody's tattoos, half the people are in black, in black. There's a guy with a beard wearing a dress. And I'm like, these are my people. Like, it's just, we are just what we are. Yeah. And I think the gospel thrives in that environment.
Well, it seems to be right now, doesn't it? There's a lot of interest. So. Yeah. Okay. So practically speaking, what are some things, maybe there's somebody listening, watching right now who's like, I am stuck in that performance place where I still feel like I got to be that person. What can they do?
Well, I think they need to figure out what about them is unchanging, and what about them is so specifically designed by God. I'm a big fan of Enneagram. This is just where I'm at. I think it's a really special tool. And I think when you can start to see the darker side of your gifts, it only helps strengthen and highlight the brighter side of your gifts. And once you know who you are in ministry, once you know, like, oh, that's just not my path, then you can begin to pour that into the church in a way that is eternal. And so I'm a protector. I'm an Enneagram 8, right? I didn't know that. I just knew that anytime I saw somebody weak being hurt, I was in it. The problem was sometimes I didn't have good eyes to evaluate who was weak or not. And so then I would become a bully, because I couldn't evaluate the situation. Once I was able to kind of hold that space, then suddenly protecting made sense to me. And I was like, well, then I'll protect the staff's health, and I'll pay a cost for that. And I'll do this Thursday, Sunday service thing. People are like, it might not work, but my protection energy and essence that God has put in me said, it'll be fine. We'll make sure it's fine, because those people matter. And then those staff people told people, and then other people told people, and all of a sudden we're filled with church who's like, oh, we do health here. We don't sacrifice our staff members here, on the altar. We have balance. We have time away. That all came from this place that I approached, where somebody else could still get there, but I think it should come from however they're made, however they're built. But to do that, you have to do a lot of introspective work. Yeah. And that's what therapy does. That's what spending time with people who understand how to ask good internal questions. We do a great job at asking external growth questions. We do a really bad job of asking questions about, but why?
Yeah.
Like, why am I this way? And what in my story has driven that? And also, just because it produces doesn't make it good. And so it just really doesn't.
As an Enneagram 3,
okay,
I know this.
Yeah.
I know. What
Okay.
you just said is
Good.
true. Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. Because production for me is just like second nature. I love it. You know, do it better.
Yeah.
But there's sometimes it's driven by fear or comparison or, you know, whatever. So
I think they have to be willing to step outside the system enough to realize they're in a system, and we all are.
Yeah.
Most people are just like, no, I just do what I do. No, you're not. You're operating out of guidelines and rules that you learned in your family, and you learned in seminary, and you learned in the church.
Yeah.
You learn to do what you do. And when you can step outside of that and look at your motivations, you can realign those motivations in a way that makes sense when the cost comes, because it does. It comes whether you blow your church up to 5,000 people and barely have a marriage like I used to, or you decide to keep your church focused on whatever path God has out for it, but your marriage is thriving and your adult children like mine are saying, Dad, there's like stuff in your life that's different. I'm going to pay a cost either way. I'd rather pay that cost. I'd rather follow how God wants me to follow and measure what I think he measures. And I think he measures my marriage, my parenting, my friendship. I think he measures all those things at a much higher level than my preaching and leadership. They're important, but they're things that I steward like my family. And I don't know that I did them well without understanding why I was operating how I was.
Yeah. Wow. That's fantastic. I mean, what I pick up here is that sense of stewardship that you talked about is that's driving you, because you're picturing that handoff.
Oh yeah.
In a sense, going, I want it to be good.
Yeah. The first building we were given when we signed the papers on the merger, the building still had Oregon territory on the papers. Yeah. So,
wow.
So the land had been passed, all the I guess the legal entity of the church had been incorporated before Washington was a state.
Unbelievable.
And so although they had moved around and did lots of stuff, they never stopped existing as that entity.
Wow.
And that drove deeply into my heart the fact that since I think it was like 1886 is when the people who started what was known as First Baptist it's one of the very first churches in our region.
Okay.
When they started it, like generation after generation after generation has been stewarding that.
Yeah.
All the way to me. So why would I think like, well, it's all for this season. It's all for this purpose. All those people's prayers and sacrifice was so that I could finally harness it and know exactly what to do. I'm just another link in the chain.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of that.
There's a certain disappointment and joy in that, I think.
I think there is. Yeah. You're not as special as you thought you were.
Yeah. That's cool. So if you think about barriers to mental health for people in ministry, for sure, this whole thing about fear and about being found out as an imperfect person is one thing. I can think of like one other one that I can think of is money. It costs money to do this kind of work. I think that's something that you spoke at our recent event in Vancouver for Multi-PDX. And, one of the things we talked about there was this desire to put out this initiative to help fund low cost, confidential, high quality counseling for ministry leaders in the area. Yeah. And there is more coming. If you're listening or watching right now, stay tuned. There's great news coming for that.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one. Other one is money. And how did you deal with this? Because clearly your wife was in therapy, then you got in therapy. That's expensive. How did you do that?
Super expensive. I didn't go into therapy until she came out. Actually. Partly because we couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
We also had some extended family that her parents saw the importance of this, so they were willing because we asked to help out. At this point right now, Kessid helps with my therapy and anything that I might need, because I'm still in therapy right now just for check-ins and checkups and where I'm at. So I think you can also weave it into your budget and eventually. Yeah. That does take a while. There's also foundations locally like His Heart and some of these other places that people have given money so that that folks who are in especially any sort of community support leadership role could have access to a discounted therapy. There are ways to do it. we plant churches, right? It's hard. We figure out how to do it.
Yep.
And you just have to decide it's a priority and not go, well, I tried for 2 weeks and that was it. Clearly God shut the door. Well, then you should move away because church planting here is not going to work for you because, it's hard. It is really hard. But, and like I said, and some of it is like our church does the emotionally healthy spirituality classes.
Really? Okay.
So there are churches around too that have stuff that you can put yourself in to awaken. There's so much Enneagram stuff online. So there are
steps toward it.
There's steps toward it and ways to kind of, begin to self-realize what kind of therapy you need and where you want to go with it. Because I do story-informed therapy work. And so it's all based on kind of my story, my childhood, my experiences. And it's a lot of self-directed, kind of where I kind of guide my therapist towards where I'm wanting to go. I'm not just soup in a room.
Just sitting there. Yeah.
Just like, hey, whatever you want me to do.
Yeah.
And that worked for me. I needed that. I needed to, with my personality, I knew that.
So that's why you're saying shop your therapist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Cause you might not have a clue. And you might need someone who's really good at cracking safes.
Yeah.
Versus I walked in with my doors, on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to go through the stuff. So, and neither is stronger or weaker.
Yeah.
It's just, but knowing enough about what you're bringing to the table that somebody's going to have to get through, can help guide a lot around, where you go and what access you have.
Yeah. That's great. Another big barrier I could see, would be lack of support. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, you even said your elders were kind of like, is this going to be okay?
Yeah.
What about if you've got a spouse that doesn't even believe this is valid or something like that, where you're like, I need to spend money. I need to invest myself in my own personal health, but I'm not getting the support there. What do you think would be a good way to approach that?
Yeah. I want to be genuine that I was that spouse. Okay. So, when my wife went into therapy, until I saw the fruit, I was really like, hey, this seems, it almost seems like a new path to help. Like, are you leaning away from Jesus to go get this support and encouragement? Right. So I was that spouse. So I want to answer from that perspective that if you can get to a place where the person that's supposed to know you better than anybody else can see freedom in your life, they can see fruit in your life, they can see actual touchable, relevant change, they usually get on board really, really fast. I did. And I was pretty hard hearted about it. When I started.
Well, okay. So what did your wife do to persevere during that season?
She said, I love you. And, and I support what you're doing in ministry, but I now need to go and make sure that I survive this.
Yeah.
And I didn't love that language. I don't think it played really well on my ego, right? And with the church that I was a part of.
Sure.
I was nervous that it made it look like we didn't have the marriage that I needed to have. But she just followed the spirit, and she was like, I am deeply convicted that this is important for me. Mm-hmm. And so, she went and did the work, and the work was undeniable. And so I don't know if on the flip side, if I guess I had gone how I would have gone if she was pushing against me. Like at the time I was pushing against her. I think this is maybe comes down to our own individual callings and our own relationships with God. And I think marriage is incredibly important and a beautiful picture of Jesus and the church and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we're still sons and daughters and we're responsible for where he leads. And I think that if God's like, hey, I have tools out there that can help you. Yeah. You need to go access them. And that might be part of the new you planting process. It's just going to be ugly because it's messy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is messy.
It sounds like the real answer, if you feel like you don't have support, is you got to stick with what you know you need to do.
You have to.
And insist on that and have those boundaries and have those, but she sounds like she did it pretty gracefully.
She did. Oh yeah. But she still brings it up all the time. So
that's awesome.
She's like, you're only doing all this because of me. And I'm like, you're right.
But the cool thing is that you can share that. And how many people, even listening right now, are going to be like, oh, I'm so glad that he said that, because that's where we are as a couple, or where I feel like maybe with my board or whatever. And so it's
and I would say anytime we add health to our lives, it creates a tension, whether that's deciding to go to the gym 4 days a week and trying to figure out where those hours are coming from. Or this. And I think if any spouse that hears, I need to go create more health for me so I can create health for you.
Yeah.
There's going to be tension in that. And it has to be worth it because you know inside that you need it.
Yeah. That's great.
No, I don't know. I didn't experience that side. My wife was the.
Even as we reflect on the rest of our life, it's like, that's probably how we get to where we need to be.
I think so.
By going, I'm clear on it. And now I can advocate for myself on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's important.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. What do you think, if you could paint like a picture, brushstrokes of what you hope happens in our metro area with the gospel in the next 20 years, what do you hope?
I hope that, I hope churches get better at dealing with people who are spiritually curious. I hope we get better at sitting in rooms, that are filled with tension and knowing that the tension is what the Holy Spirit is using to activate stuff in a healthy, good way, unlock stuff, free people of stuff, and that we stop being voices of resolve all the time. I just think people are really tired of people with answers, especially answers that after a while just don't vet out. And I know at our church, I started saying from stage, which again, more pushback, that we want to be a place for people who are spiritually curious and a place for people who are deeply in love with Christ like they never have been before. And that we're willing to sit in the tension of those two kinds of walks at the same time. We've said for a while now, the only thing that everybody gets at Kessid the same is that they're not going to get what they want completely. And there's no other way even to do fantastic. A generational church.
Yeah.
Of having a grandparent with an adult child, with a high schooler. Like there has to be tension if they all want to go to church together to know like, well, there might be too many babies in the audience for the high schooler and they're so distracting, but there's also too much bass for the grandparent.
Yeah.
And if we can sit in the space where bass and babies both matter, then we can suddenly ask great questions. We can sit in tension. We can be curious together. Cause I think the way people are in the Northwest, I'm gonna be thoughtful about this. I think the way people are in the Northwest who didn't grow up in church, the way they function, the way they see the world, actually has a lot to teach the way people have done church in the Northwest and how they have lived in this little vacuum of, well, this is how everybody operates and everybody thinks and what the clothes everybody wears. And I think God's tearing that down because there are so many people who need the love, but they can't get past the church that says, well, in order for you to be loved, this is how you have to operate. And I think there should be more curiosity, more language of inclusion when it comes to being able to sit with people of different backgrounds and different stories. I think we're all moving them towards the same place, to full restorative, gospel, beautiful lives. But I really struggle a lot of times when I sit with people and they're like, well, once, if they can just decide that, the water bottle of water is where Jesus is. And I'm like, well, what if water's in a cup? Or what if water's in a bucket? Or God forbid, water's in a puddle? Oh no, God would never let us drink water from a puddle. And I'm like, And I just a lot of times see a lot more love from people outside the church than I do sometimes. I'm generalizing. Yeah. From people inside the church. And I don't think that's good stewardship. Yeah. We're stewarding our culture the same as we're stewarding our buildings, earlier conversation. And it's our job to meet them. And to see them. And if you can't bring someone to church, I have more people visiting Kessid right now, not because they like Kessid. I actually had a lady tell me this. I don't really care for the church. I don't really love your preaching, but I have a neighbor that I don't feel comfortable bringing to my church. Okay. So I'm going to bring her to your church. Her words. It's not my church, but your community, because I know at your community, you have space for her questions. And so she switched churches to a church that is less for her, because it's impacting her neighbor. And I thought that's a beautiful thing. I thought that was a beautiful thing. I mean, my feelings were hurt that my preaching wasn't as good for her, but still I was like, wow. She's like, yeah, I'm not here for you. I'm here for her. And she said, I couldn't take her to my church. They would run her out. And I was like, And so there's tension in that because, you end up with a room full of people who are there for their neighbors, maybe not to feed their own, what would you say? Their own needs around style of ministry or around whatever else that they feel the truest of church should operate like. But boy, when their friend comes to Christ and gets baptized,
it's feeding in a whole new way.
Oh, none of that matters.
Yeah.
None of that matters. And we have dozens of those stories. And so, so I'm just grateful to be a part of it, but it's costly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are one or two resources, books, whatever that you would recommend just in terms of what you feel like strongly, this is what the church needs?
Well, the EHS stuff is really easy.
Emotionally healthy spirituality.
Yeah. Really, really easy stuff to grab hold of, to dive into. If you want to just see a basic, grief, kind of book, the same book we give to everybody, no matter the loss, it's a book called Tear Soup, and it's actually, by a local author here. And, we did a whole series on it, had the author come. And it's a book all about what you do with grief and how you make a soup out of it, and how sometimes you share it with friends, and then sometimes you eat it by yourself. And then sometimes you put it back in the fridge and you go on with life and you don't really forget about it. And then all of a sudden in the middle of the night, you're like, I think I'm supposed to go warm up some soup. It's just really beautiful. It's all illustrated, kind of like a children's book, transformed our church, in terms of that topic. And so then we're building a grief class out of that.
Okay.
So that's sort of, those two resources primarily right now, are really powerful. I know he's provocative, but Rohr's Enneagram book, A Christian Perspective, is really insightful if you're interested in that kind of a thing.
Okay.
And then, from there, it's been tough. From there, it gets into, a lot more secular books, and you have to be really careful when you start handing those things out, because, they do eventually, lead kind of to this whole self-reliant, self-focused, it actually ends up leading almost in a circle back to self-image again. It's really interesting when you walk out, kind of the way the church has taught us to run, and how some of psychology kind of walks us into. It's very similar, sort of that natural place of like, well, now I'm good, so the world's good. And so we try to stay away from that. We try to continue to use therapy to support, to awaken, to help people manage. But at the end of the day, we're still pushing them back into the gospel. We're pushing them back into, walking that path out with Jesus, because walking it out with a therapist is great, but all of that should lead towards and through Jesus. And so that has been interesting, because there's a gap between those two communities.
Right.
And that's the place that anybody who decides to do this work, sits in. And that's the place I sit in as well, which is, okay, how far do I walk this out before I'm like, no, that's actually just spiritual oppression. But there's some tools, but also you've got to come to a place where you're less reliant on you and your insight and your knowledge. And that sometimes, as I've talked about it, it almost feels like, well, hold on, that's a different agenda than what it isn't. I don't believe it is, but I believe that's where the tension sits. And I think that both of these paths, because I believe therapy truly is a spiritual path. Inside the context, it's supposed to be is mind-blowingly beneficial. But only going to church or only going to therapy, I think both of those can be dangerous, because they don't allow us to see the full perspective of who we are and what we're carrying. And so, did I answer your question?
You did. Yeah. Thank you. That's very insightful.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. That space is really difficult.
Okay.
Yeah. That we're in right now.
It sounds like we could tease that out more in the future.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah. We should build something on it, do more gatherings and things where we can figure out, what do we do inside this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how can people get a hold of you if they want to follow up, if they got a question or want to check out what you're up to?
My email's on the website at KessidChurch.com. I think it's Danny C at Kessid Church.
Okay.
We spell it Kessid, instead of the typical Chesed, or, cause we started off with the church with that name, but everybody kept calling it Cheesed Church. And I know it's like Kessid is how you're supposed to say it. So we were like, forget this. It's such true to form to who we became. We're like, we'll just spell it how it sounds. We'll spell it for our neighbors and let all the church people be like, why is this dude spelling it like this? And I'm like, because our neighbors can pronounce the word now.
That's awesome.
So Danny C at KessidChurch.com. I'm happy to talk with whoever I can and, support whoever I can.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, I'm grateful. Thank you for having me.
Yep.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.